Hey listeners, last year was our 15th year of the best in food storytelling. As we head into 2025, we're kicking off a contest in collaboration with the podcast series Feast and Harmony and Sixth Man, where you have the opportunity to win a 4-night cruise for 2 on Chefs Making Waves, a food, wine, and spirits festival at sea. When you donate to HRN, you'll be entered for the chance to win a porthole cabin for 2 on Chefs Making Waves, sailing May 5th through 9th, 2025, from Miami to Cozumel, Mexico on Norwegian Gem. You'll also support another year of great food storytelling with a portion of your donation going toward disaster relief for the food and beverage communities within Western North Carolina and Southern California. This cruise is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for culinary adventurers, featuring top celebrity chefs including Jonathan Waxman, Antonio Lafaso, Robert Irvine, and many, many more. There's a myriad of experiences such as restaurant takeovers, live food and mixology demos, themed parties, and more. To enter your chance to win, please visit heritageradionetwork.org/cruise. Terms and conditions apply. You must be 21 or over to enter. That's heritageradionetwork.org/cruise.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni, I'm the host. It's our 16th year. And guess where I am? I came up to Boston for the Bolazol Festival. And of course I had to go to Deep Ellum, the new Deep Ellum, which is in Waltham, and my good buddy Max Toste. And we're going to talk about great beer bars and why he loves Pozzoli and Mezcal so much, as well as Cascale. So let's go around the room. We're going to introduce, the guests will introduce themselves. But thanks to heritageradionetwork.org.
I'm Jackie Cain. Jacqueline Cain is my byline. I'm a writer in Boston, focused on food and beer mostly, and I thank Jimmy for having me on.
This is Max Toste here from Deep Ellum and Lone Star and Lenora in Portland. Nice chatting with you guys.
All right, well, I first met Max, almost 4 years ago, and he really wanted us to bring the Bolazol Festival up to Boston, and I got to come in and meet him at Lone Star in Cambridge and really get to know him as a chef and knowledgeable person in the hospitality world. You were actually my first professional introduction into Boston. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey? Deep Ellum to me is a famous beer bar. It closed, you've revived it. But in between years, you had Lone Star, you know a lot about Mexican food. Give our listeners a little taste of where you've been, because you're kind of like me. You love mezcal, you love Mexican food. You've got quite a few interests.
Yeah, Jimmy, it's nice to see you, as always. It's kind of hard to sum up my culinary life. Basically, I love all things yummy. That's pretty much how I would sort of sum up everything that I'm interested in. Like, if it's delicious and you can eat or drink it, then I'm probably going to get into it. My buddy Ben had the best line that I love to steal, that he says, I love the top 5% of everything. So, growing up loving food, my family cooked. We're Portuguese by descent, most of us. Food's a big part of our family, and I was going to either become a chef or a musician. I ended up becoming a musician for a career for a long time, and then I always supported myself by working in restaurants. Long story short, I met my business partner Aaron, working together about almost 25 years ago, and we opened up Deep Ellum, and we wanted to open our favorite neighborhood bar that was just served the best, awesomest things we could find. So, good cocktails, the best beer we could buy, best spirits we could get our hands on. And over time, that sort of morphed into a love of agave cocktails and discovering mezcal that was brought to me by Mr. Ron Cooper from Del Maguey, who walked into my bar and said, hey, I have this thing called mezcal. And I was like, what the hell's mezcal? And next thing you know, I'm hooked on that. I did live in Southern California as a kid and was kind of weaned on Mexican food. So Mexican food had been my secret side passion since I was a very small child. And when Aaron and I had the opportunity to open a location next to Deep Ellum, the landlord told us we could expand if we wanted to. And we were like, well, we don't really want to expand because we liked Deep Ellum. We're like, what if we just did something different? And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if you could like get really good tacos and agave drinks? And it was definitely like a novel idea at the time. And I figured people either get it or they won't. It's only 40 seats, so who cares? And that kind of is the rest is history. We just kind of chugged along. We opened another Love the Lone Star. COVID happened, closed Deep Ellum, came back, reopened Deep Ellum, opened a place in Portland that's sort of like Lone Star 2.0 called Lenora. And I've traveled in Mexico and all over the country and, just trying to find yummy stuff.
Max, today, if you were in Mexico, what would you get for lunch if you could pick one dish?
It depends where I was because Mexico is very regional. But I got to be honest, I'm like obsessed with aguachiles. You can find those in most coastal parts. It's essentially like usually shrimp that's cooked in a really spicy or tossed in a really spicy green sauce. I love aguachiles. And there's a little part of the coast near Guadalajara, like south of Mazatlan, where they do this smoked marlin. It's like a bycatch, and they smoke it, and they serve it on tostadas and burritos. And it's so unique and delicious. I would eat some aguachiles and a smoked marlin burrito.
That sounds pretty good. And then, Jackie, you got a great story. I mean, how do you become a food writer? And, you know all the cool places. You know Max from Deep Ellum, and you've written about so many great things. Welcome to the show. I'm really thrilled to have you on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I would say I am a food writer because of my passion for food as well, food and beer. I have a background in journalism. I used to be a newspaper reporter in the great state of Vermont, which is a great place to be if you love food and beer. So I started my career in Vermont, and when we moved to Boston, I set my sights on becoming a food writer because I always say this, and it's true, to support my lifestyle. Like, I was a community newspaper reporter, and I was sick of going to select board meetings and school committee meetings, and I love to go to bars. So I was like, how do I cover bars as my community? I'm a community newspaper reporter, but for bars is really where I came to it from. So I knew Deep Ellum before I moved here because its reputation preceded as a beer bar. And I'm from Massachusetts, so I had a lot of friends in Boston. So I would visit and was always like, we need to go to this bar, I want to check this place out. I also worked in restaurants as well, so that was always my backup. Like Max said he was a musician and always supported himself in working in restaurants. I was the same. I'm a writer, but I always supported myself working in restaurants. So when I first moved to Boston, I had a couple of restaurant jobs, and through my job at Bantam Cider Company, may it rest in peace, I loved that place, I met the editor of Eater Boston, like almost immediately, right off the bat. And I was like, oh, I would love to write for you. So that's how I started. So it was like quicker than I thought. This was like a 5-year plan, but I started freelancing for Eater. And during that time is when I met Max because the Lone Star Cambridge was in planning. And you had told a previous editor, or I don't know if it was an editor, you had told somebody else at Eater that the idea was for like a Lone Star Deep Ellum cousin. Like, it wouldn't be exactly like Lone Star Alston. It would have a little sensibility of Deep Ellum too. And I took that to mean more beers. I took that to mean that it was going to be like a Lone Star with a beer bar. So I was like keenly interested in that story. And I remember like tracking you down and harassing you for news on that story. And that's how we met. And it was that winter where we got snow every week.
Oh, Snowmageddon.
It was Snowmageddon winter, yeah. So I think that it took a little longer. So I think by the time I wrote that story, or like by the time that Lone Star Cambridge opened, I was working at Boston Magazine. So I got that job after Eater. So I was at Boston Magazine until the pandemic, and I've been a freelance writer pretty much ever since. Still focused on food and beer as much as I can and going out. I broadened a little bit, but that's my origin story. So I would say Max and Deep Ellum, you were among the first people I met, and it was definitely one of the first bars that I loved in Boston.
So Max, I mean, my short time in Boston, to me, Jackie's the voice of Boston, food and drink and events. And when she writes something, it all you need to know is what she writes. Do you want to say anything about her and her impact on the community?
Well, I've had a great relationship with Jackie. I guess it's been 10 years.
Right.
Right? I think I enjoy your aesthetic, and I think you agree with me, and I agree with you about like what's good and what's not good. So that's pretty much appreciating somebody's sensibility and kind of having like interests. I really appreciate people who have a voice in the print and media, who appreciate things that have integrity, as opposed to being like, oh, this is the hot shit that everyone's going to go to and take pictures of and now post on social media, and then 2 weeks later they're going to close because no one actually really went there. It was like a fake event. I like that you like things that have a bit more integrity and staying power.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also feel like, I do this for my lifestyle, but I also am blessed with good taste. Like, Snacky Cain is my Instagram name, and that's a real nickname from my parents when I was a little kid. Like, I was Snacky Cain. I was always like, when are we going to eat again? Okay, we're having lunch. What's for dinner? So, like, I grew up loving food, too.
Okay, so, Max mentioned aguachiles. Some favorite foods of your own, your life or your career, or things that you've covered that you want to tell us about?
Oh, let's see. Favorite food. I struggle with this question because I love food so much, so my default answer to this question is butter. My favorite food is butter. I also really love onions, and I know that's not really what people are asking when they say what's your favorite food, but that's where it starts for me. It's like really good.
But butter's awesome. It's a great ingredient. In fact, I was just reading about it, and I was literally at a party, and there was good butter and rolls, and that's all I ate.
Right? Like sometimes you don't need much else than butter, but I say it because, it's also the start of a lot of delicious things too. And yeah, onions and stuff. Like, I just love quality ingredients, stuff like that. I would say my favorite food, I don't know. As a family, we didn't really go out that much. Like, I always say this too, when I started writing about restaurants, I knew so little. Like, it's embarrassing sometimes when I think about how little I knew. And that's my secret. I Google a lot. But I've learned a lot, over the years. But I was blessed with a really awesome cook for a dad. My dad was the cook in our house, and just he cooked. It wasn't experimenting. He cooked, similar dishes week after week. But it was things like stir fries. It was things like, an Italian bolognese that was like as authentic as it comes, from my Irish American dad. So I think it just starts with really good ingredients and then just a love of hanging out. And yeah, I lived in Vermont, like I mentioned, which is a really great place to turn 21. So I never had a bad beer phase. Even in college, I never did. It was the 2000s, so it was a good time for craft beer. Craft beer was like burgeoning. I turned 21 in 2009. So craft beer was always what I drank. Like, when someone would say, get me a 30 rack of Natty Light, I would say, get me a 12 pack of Long Trail. So that is where I started. So I feel like I've always had good taste in a way. Like, I've been blessed with good taste. And then, yeah, meeting people in Boston, like the places that I liked to go have always had just really good ingredients, really good programs for food and drink. And that's where it starts for me.
No, that's great. I love that. It's funny you say butter and onions, because there's like that cliche of like this starter pack for, ooh, what are you cooking?
Yeah.
It's like onions and garlic, sauteing and butter.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, what is that?
Oh, it smells so good in here.
Yeah, it smells so good in here. It's like this should be a candle.
Yeah.
You don't need a candle. You can just cook. I remember you walking in someone's house, and they're like blessing it by like throwing some garlic in butter or oil and waving it around the house. So, we're drinking too. Like, there's little things about Diabellum. Like, to me, it's special being here. There was a mystique to it that I never got to appreciate, and I was thrilled. But a little over a year ago, that Max reopened here, and I'm walking down this old commercial street called Moody Street, and I feel like I'm in a city. There's a mishmash of different shops, but this is what, to me, a city feels like. So, tell us a little bit about this neighborhood. I know there's like, what's your favorite bakery? Is there a place you get coffee around here?
Well, this neighborhood is cool. It is truly a neighborhood. I lived in Brighton and Allston in the 90s, and in the late 90s and early aughts, I would come over here because it was a real Italian-American neighborhood, and there was like deli after deli. There was a sausage place. You get your meats in this place, you get your cans of tomatoes in this place. I just love that kind of stuff. And the cranky guy behind the bar, the cranky old lady who was like, you're not from around here. But I loved visiting that. And like all the neighborhoods in Boston, there's gentrification and they change, and there's a little less of it being like as Italian. There's a lot of Indians here, which is pretty wild, and like the Patel neighborhood market. Like Jimmy, it feels like a city because there's like a lot of different people here, but it's also very neighborhoody. People say hello. People grow up here. They're proud to be here. It's got a blue-collar feel that I really enjoy. It reminds me a lot of Brighton and Allston 25, 30 years ago, which is not long before we opened the original Deep Ellum in Allston. People who work and live in the city are here, and they walk around, and I don't know, it's got a really good neighborhood feel. There's actually a lot of good restaurants. I like the Mexican place across the street. Like, it's pretty legit. The Indian food in the neighborhood is really good. There's a guy, an old Korean guy down the street making omakase sushi that's like pretty dynamite. There's some sleepers, there's some old Italian stuff, Di Pasquale sausage in the, down the street a little ways. It's legit. I mean, it's cool. I like it here.
I think of Moody Street as like a bit of a restaurant row. I'm blanking on the dive bar. It starts with a J. Jocko's. There's a good dive bar, which you always need. One of the things that I love about this location for Deep Ellum is how much it feels like the old one. Like, the first time I walked in here, I got a little verklempt because it's like the mirror image of the Allston one. It's like just like opposite setup, right? Am I remembering correctly?
Yep.
And it has like the exposed brick wall like the Allston one did. It has this weird analog fan that the Allston one did. It has the steer head. Like, it feels like not even a grown-up version of Deep Ellum. It's the same. It's just like in the burbs because we're older now and none of us can afford to live in the city necessarily.
And let's talk about, draft beer, craft beer in bars. I never expected it to be the mainstream drink of America. But I always sought out, and I still do, the special places where they care for the selection and how it's served and everything. And I think what Max has done is that he makes me want to try everything on the draft list, switching to beer, as well as I'm learning about the cask ale from Beverly, which I've usually turn up my nose if it's not from England. Max, tell us about how you focused on the cask beer in particular, and because we're drinking it, and I know you gave Snacky Jackie a tour of where the keg is. But that's a big story because it's like, if draft beer, real craft beer is a niche of a niche, cask ale is like the niche of a niche of a niche.
Well, it's part of our whole program in that, like I said before, the top 5%, like, I like things that are awesome and yummy. And I don't want to serve craft beer because it's craft beer. I want to serve beer that's really good. And the lagers from Germany, some of the ales from England, the IPA from California, there's local beers that are great, but I want it to be awesome. My favorite whiskeys are bourbon and scotch. They're not local whiskey, and sorry, they're not as good. My favorite gin is from London. Sorry, local gin's not as good. I don't care. I can argue with you all day long. However, cask ale is tricky because the best cask ale comes from England. But the nature of cask ale makes it hard to get cask ale from England. Imagine you want the best baguette in the world. Well, it might be in the 10th Arrondissement in Paris, except that baguette from the 10th Arrondissement in Paris, to eat it at your house in Watertown, it's not as good. It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't travel the same. So to find...
Even if it's frozen and I finish baking it at home?
We can argue about that if you want. But...
What kind of oven do you have?
Yeah. Right. But the idea with cask is it's a living, breathing thing. So to get the best casks, we would always buy British casks back in the day because of the style and what I liked. However, the freshness was a tricky thing. So Backbeat up in Beverly, Pete Harkin, great brewer, he's making these like spot-on British styles, and you can set your watch to them. Bitters, milds, stouts, strong ales, English IPAs, English golden ales, which are very popular there, not as popular here, and they're fantastic. And what's great is they're to style, using either ingredients from the UK or very similar ingredients, brewed to style, but brewed in Beverly. I pick them up in my Tacoma, I drive them over here, I put them, I let them rest, I do my thing, and boom, we have this beer that tastes like the beer I want it to taste like, but it's made 30 miles away, 20, whatever it is, miles away. And it's great, and we're lucky to have it.
So, Jackie, this is your first time having cask ale?
This is not my first time having cask ale, but this is my first time having this beer on cask. So let me make sure I'm getting the name right. So it's Monty by Backbeat Brewing Co., which is an English bitter. It's delicious. I have some experience with cask ale, and yeah, when I first moved to Boston, I was saying this earlier, I worked at John Harvard's brew pub in Cambridge, may it rest in peace, and we always had a cask. So the brewers would make something, they would like make it to spec or whatever. So it was always fresh. But the stereotype at the time, and this is not a dig on the great brewers at John Harvard's, but the stereotype at the time was flat and warm, that it like wasn't carbonated, that it was served at cellar temp, and that it was warm. So I like dabbled in having cask, but it never hit the spot like quite like a refreshing beer. Whereas this one that I'm drinking today, it's when it came out, it's so beautiful when it hits the bar. It has this like foamy, fluffy cloud head, and when it settles a little, it's super clear and bright looking in color, even though it's like dark, like an English bitter would be. And then yeah, it's not warm. It's definitely cool. And you were saying it's a little warmer than your typical draft beer, but it's not flat and warm. So if you have that perception of cask ale, which some people I think still harbor, definitely give it a try, because this is a really fun experience.
I mean, you used exactly the right word, cool.
Yeah.
It's not room temperature. It's cellar temperature, but it's actually like cellar temp. Cellar temp is cooler than just like not hot. Anyway, the carbonation is natural. The temperature is cool, and it takes a lot of love and effort to get it to be served just right. But when it is right, it's like really delicious. Also, the carbonation is softer, so I find it like if I can't drink a lot of beer anymore. Maybe I've drank too much beer in my life. I don't know. That's probably the reason. But something about cask, it's like the beverage version of like a really good sourdough bread. Like my body just likes it more. It's like it feels better to me to drink. It doesn't make me burp. It doesn't make me feel really full. It's just like it feels like a nutritious thing that I like, which is kind of weird to say. We're talking about booze, and there's always like this intoxicant sort of angle when it comes to booze, but booze is like food. Maybe not bourbon, but when you're talking about beer and wine, it's food. It's a culinary thing. And when you're talking about, not to do a little callback, but mezcal, spirits, it's reverential, it's celebratory, it's special. And, recently in the news, there's been talk of alcohol being bad for you, and I'm not going to say alcohol's good for you, but I get really annoyed when my sweet, sweet booze gets all lumped together, as if a Red Bull and vodka is the same as a bottle of Bordeaux. Crushing 78 Natty Lights is not the same as delicious English bitter. Scotch is not the same as White Claw. So don't give me this alcohol's bad for you. Keep your poison crap away from me. I will drink the good stuff happily.
And let's go back to what the proper temperature should be for cask ale. You mentioned there's a place in England and there's a temperature. How do you define cellar temperature? Like, for example, cellar temperature, you'd probably wear a sweater.
So cellar temperature in the north of England versus the south of England, and this is like pretty niche information, but it comes from a book from Camera, the Campaign for Real Ale, that I read many decades ago. and it's about the south of England. Typically, the cellars, because it's a little warmer there, they're in the sort of around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And in Yorkshire, in the north of England and Scotland, the temperatures in the basements or cellars is slightly cooler geographically. So you're getting in the more 48 degree Fahrenheit-ish. So I like to refer to our temperature as Yorkshire temperature. So it's a little cooler, and it's because I like that. I also like what it does for the beer. It helps it live a little longer. And it's typically better for the customer. Jackie mentioned the misconception of beer being warm and flat. If the beer is healthier and cooler, everyone's going to like it better.
And Jackie, you got a little talk from Max, and we're going to ask him to repeat kind of how he serves it and some of the steps. But did he take you downstairs or show you what the cask looks like?
Yeah, you did. It's called a firkin, right? So it's like a keg, but it's maybe a little like squatter, a little rounder. And it has its own little kegerator that you've jury-rigged. Like, that's a custom piece down there. Yep. Keeping it at its appropriate temperature, which is different from the main cooler room for all the other draft beers that are on here. So, yeah, it's I would say what's the word? Bootleg seems negative, but it's a homemade setup with the right serving vessels. And that's why you said, too, it's been harder to source, or it takes a little effort to source cask ales, because not everyone can package a beer that way for you. Not everyone can put it in those firkins that need to go in that specific system.
So let's start with how you served it. Jackie had a pint, and you came and sniffed it, and you realized you had to do something to that line to make it work. So the whole process from when you got that cask, how you're tapping it, each day how you're serving it.
Yeah, so this is earlier in the day. We're here recording in the ether, but in our world right now, it was earlier in the day, and the first pull off the cask by one of my fellow coworkers here. The first pull, it hadn't been purged yet. So basically, the firkin's in the basement, and the line goes up to the bar. And when you open in the day, the first pull, you pull a little through so that the beer that's in the line isn't what you're serving, right? You don't really necessarily need to do that for draft beer, but for cask beer, it's essential because that beer is touching oxygen, it can oxidize, and the whole thing. So I saw that Jackie had got the cask, and I went and pulled a taste for myself to see what kind of condition it was in. I smelled a little diacetyl, and I thought, uh-oh, I hope this is okay. Dumped it out, pulled it again. Oh, no, that was just the beer in the line. So then I asked my coworker, hey, did you pull this through? Is this the first one? She's like, oh, yeah. Anyway, long story short, we remedied it to pull a proper pint of fresh beer from the firkin that is in good condition. So all this is basically to describe that this is a giant pain in the ass. And the reason why nobody... Cheers. The reason why there's not a lot of this is it's a lot more involved than just draft beer. It's even more involved than the fanciest craft beer. And there's a very small market for it. There's very little demand. Jackie, you mentioned the sourcing thing. There's a supply and demand issue. They don't live as long. They're not pasteurized. They're not fined. They're not filtered. It's a live product. It's very fresh. It's like when I talk to the staff about the cask of the day, it's like, hey, the cask of the day is like the fish of the day. You sell it because it doesn't age well. That's different than draft beer. I mean, draft beer doesn't want to live on draft forever, but it also doesn't do the same thing that cask does. It doesn't oxidize the same way.
It's a labor of love. I will say this. So you said this earlier, that it kind of surprises you that craft beer became so mainstream, just because it is. Who knew? Who thought? But at the same time, it's ancient. How old? I mean, I don't know how old, but cask beer is a tradition, right? This is why this manual exists that you got, 20, 30 years ago. Cask beer, I don't know my history as well as I should, but beer from England, beer from Germany, all the beers that Deep Ellum has been sourcing for, going on 30 years, maybe 20 years, is historic. There's tradition there. And so craft beer became a trend, And yes, it's waning, but like craft beer will never die. It's older than all of us. It's gonna outlive all of us. So cask is the niche of a niche, but it has a place. Like, it's a special thing and has been for millennia, right?
I mean, living beer is like, I agree 100%, and I'm glad you bring it back to this because it's interesting. It's always like, I used to talk about it years ago, in regards to cocktail culture and craft beer and the things that people are used to at bars. The whole idea of like a gastropub being like this new thing, and I was like, well, not really. It's all this is really old. The whole point is people have gotten used to this like mass-produced consumer-driven crap. And what I like is, for the most part, people once the cat's out of the bag, and the genie's out of the bottle, we're not going to go back to like Swanson frozen dinners of the 50s and Bartles and James wine coolers. They might be retro and funny, but that's not going to become the norm. People, once you taste it, you can't go back. Now, that being said, the craft beer movement, it was its own worst enemy because it was so experimental and moved so quickly that it became less about like, hey, let's make this awesome thing, and it became like grammable and like this sort of thing, or like stunty and like how much ABV and how much IBU. Like, just give me a break. Like, so I always tried and have tried for my whole career here to represent like really good Pilsner, really good bitters, the things that are like have a longevity to them that people will come back to. And thankfully, people are like, oh man, I can't get this killer German Pilsner because the bar down the street only has hazy IPAs. And years ago, you couldn't find a German beer on draft because everybody just had like barrel-aged imperial stouts at 10%, and they can't have more than one of them or they fall over. And, English beer totally died because it's just not very sexy. So to your point of things having history, the idea of this being important and having a lifespan, it is beyond us. And like, I don't, want to like get full of myself, but like, I feel like it's important to sustain it. It's important to turn people onto it. But the people, once you like it, like you really like it. But the hard part is like, if I had a 250-seat beer hall, could I fill a beer hall of people who want this beer? Maybe not. And that's like, you can't do that like you do in Germany at Hofbrauhaus, where people come in and they all drink the same exact beer, and everyone's like, yay, one beer. Like, America gets so screwed over by the Cheesecake Factory mentality that everybody's like, oh, well, I want mine with sauce on the side, and I need my thing different, and I want this, and I have an allergy to air and oxygen. So it's like you can't just like do something cool. It has to be its own thing. So that's why I like small neighborhood bars. So people who get it, they get it, they're happy, it creates a sense of joy, creates a place for these products to really like live on. And to your point, like, this has been thousands of years of liquid bread and thousands of years of turning water into wine, right? Like this alchemic thing that we all love, and it's yummy. So it's important that we write about it like you do so wonderfully, and fill my bar with it and refuse to serve shit that sucks.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, the tradition of cheese-making excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheese-making traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheese-making culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old-world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheese-making craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
We need Deep Ellum. Deep Ellum is a treasure for this mentality. There's a handful of beer bars in Boston. Some of them are from this list that I discovered before I moved to Boston that was like best beer bars in Boston. Some of them remain. Those are Public House and Deep Ellum in this form. But like the beer bar, it's a little hard. It's hard to, I get it. It's not what sells. People want a hazy IPA these days. So, having it.
Taste it. Tell me what you taste. Because this is still the cask. We're still on the cask ale. There's something different about it. And I want you to tell us, Jackie Snacky.
So, one thing that Max taught me this, and all Deep Ellum, I feel like anytime you would come here, all the beers on draft fit this bill, which is that they're really dry and just like clean tasting. There's no residual sweetness here. This is just like a perfectly delicious English style bitter, and it's like super food friendly, and it makes me want to take another sip. And I feel like that is a hallmark of like a really good classic style of beer. That's like what the Germans gave us mostly in Pils, in Helles lagers. The English style of pub ale is just super clean and meant to complement your experience. It's not meant to dominate your taste buds. It's not meant to, like take something and be the star. It's complementing my experience right now. So this beer is super easy drinking. It's low alcohol. That's another thing. I think this one's 4.1%. So it's just really easy to drink and super clean tasting, which I know is not the most descriptive tasting note, but
What's nice about this, then whatever you call it, if you want to tell us about cask conditioning, Max, to me, it's not forced carbonated. I can taste the malt. So this is, to me, where bread and beer kind of overlap.
taste the malt. It's not what I would describe as like a malty beer that like leaves residual sweetness, or I feel like it's really well balanced. Like it is, I taste the malt, but I taste the hop too.
So Max, why is cask conditioning so important, and what is it? Because it seems like people don't know about it anymore.
So conditioning is the brewing term for carbonation, basically, more or less, simplified. So when you have a cask-conditioned ale, that means that the final carbonation happens in the cask. So the Trappist ales of Belgium, they're bottle conditioned. So those are conditioned, meaning the carbonation happens in the bottle. The bitter ales and the pub ales that Jackie mentioned that we're talking about in regards to cask ale, the beer goes into the particular vessel called a firkin, and then it's allowed to finish its fermentation sealed in that vessel. So when you drink the beer, the carbonation that's in the beer is naturally occurring carbonation. It's not forced carbonated, which happens on most draft systems. The beer is carbonated at the brewery, and then you put it on draft. You put the beer gas, pushes the beer out of the keg, and you have an inert land. Oxygen doesn't get involved. It's just CO2 and nitrogen, and it's happy. It was invented to help preserve the lifespan of beer, because all beer was like cask ale until, 100 years-ish ago. Guinness is famous because Guinness was a cask ale for quite a long time. I believe it's about 150 to 200 years they were cask ale. And they developed this very ingenious system by using nitrogen.
1950s.
Yep, by using nitrogen to push the beer into a glass that tricks your taste buds in your mouth into thinking it's cask ale because it's so much softer because the bubbles are smaller. And there wins the dominance of draft ale. Draft beer in America is completely dominant. Cask ale is practically dead. But it's really yummy, and it's really cool. And when you can taste these things, it's very unique. I've been to London, and you pop into these pubs, and you just pull in and you grab a pint, and they're just so delicious. And it's such a deep history. You can get really in the weeds talking about this because it's a cultural thing. It's a cultural phenomenon. And I like being able to offer something unique, and cask has become pretty unique in Boston, and it's very rare around the rest of the country. Because of our, sort of Irish Anglo heritage in New England, there's a bit of a market here for it, but to find cask ale outside of New England is real hard. And a lot of those, they're just a brewer's beer put on a beer engine. They're not. It's not like homage to Britain. It's just a way to serve the beer in a different way.
You know, I saw you a couple years ago, the Nearax Festival, the New England Real Ale Fest. I went for the first time 2 years ago in April of 23, and it's coming back April of 25, and the show will be out by then. But for me, I still find this is the first beer I've had from Boston area that I would say, wow, this tastes like an English-style cask. But I would go for, and the organizers would also pull from me the cask ales from Scotland and England that they had, and I still feel like that's a big draw for that event. So what can people find in an event like that? I kind of like coming to a well-curated bar like yours and having one cask that I know is going to drink right and not really go through like 30 or 40 others that I may not have right.
Jackie, have you been to Nearax before?
You know, I have not, and I regret that. I wish that I have been, because I feel like it is a bit of a cultural phenomenon, a bit of a Boston phenomenon. Correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like Nearax is it's pretty industry. Like, do people go? Do, like, fans? I'm sure, like, beer nerds go, but I'm a beer nerd, and I've never been. And when I've considered going, it's in a sort of industry context. It's like, I should go to that, you know, as a beer person in Boston, I should know about this. But I haven't been. So an event like that, I love that it exists, but I feel like that's the niche of the niche of the niche.
Yeah, it definitely is. You're right about it being industry. It's very industry, and like it's a lot of brewers.
Yeah.
There's always some expats, some Brits, and some UK natives who are happy to join. I have gone to, I think, about 20 of them.
Nice.
Over the years. I think it's a really wonderful community, and that's really kind of what it's about. There, you know, the people who put it on, you know, they're really into this stuff. The people who go, I've been seeing the same people for a long time, and we're all gray now, or just grayer or balder or fatter or older or whatever. It's its own community, and you're right. It's a niche inside a niche inside a niche, and it's funny because a lot of the craft beer guys, and especially like when I first started going to Nearax, because a lot of the craft beer guys were like really into Belgian beer. Or really into like hoppy IPAs. Mm-hmm. So they would always be like, oh, that's like the warm flat beer festival.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, dude, it's not. It's so good. And the thing is, the people who put the festival on right now, Ryan Leonard is the master cellarman for Nearax. He actually lives just a couple towns over. He's a great dude, really into it, great palate. He does a really good job making sure the beers are in perfect condition, at least the best he can. And the temperature is killer. They have this really complicated system of glycol and snakes and the whole thing to make sure that all the beers at the festival are at the proper temperature. And they're shooting for a similar temperature to what we're serving here. And most of the beers are on beer engines. They're not just coming right out of the tap, right out of the firkin. And, you know, Jimmy, when I go to the Nearax, I typically try to taste as many of the UK beers as I can. And I don't typically go for the local stuff just because the UK stuff is so much more novel. It's also typically more of the styles that I like. But ironically, a lot of the UK beers that have come over, especially the last 5 years plus, they're UK breweries brewing pale British ales or mild British ales of some variety, but using American hop varietals. So there's this interesting mishmash. There's a huge influence from American craft beer brewing to UK craft beer brewing. So you'll get like New England IPAs from Scotland. And you know, I tend to avoid those because I don't like them here and I don't care about them anyway. But it's really cool. I also can drink a lot of cask ale. So I really enjoy going to the Nearax events multiple nights. And you get the little booklet and you check out your favorite thing, and Wednesday is different than Thursday, and Friday morning is different than Saturday night because they rotate the beers. They're not all on, and they have them set up so that there's something different for people, so they'll go different nights. I can't recommend it enough, although I can't usually drag that many people with me there, but I like going.
Yeah, I went 2 years ago. I'm going back this year, April 2nd and 5th. But there's some insider stuff that I can't say on the air, but there's a special session. And when I was there 2 years ago, I saw Max there was Will from Cambridge Brewing, the guy from American Flatbread was there, Woody from Tributary, and a couple of other guys that we knew, Chris from Notch.
Yeah, I mean, everybody that I like is there. All the great brewers, and especially the guys who came up through the ranks. And I guess it's like an older generation thing where the real skill of a lot of these brewers was to make awesome beer and make it the same every time. And they have a mentality more like bakers. The modern craft vibe has turned into this experimentation thing, which isn't bad, but if you can't make the same beer twice, do you really know what you're doing? Or do you just have a happy accident? Which I'm tired of tasting happy accidents.
One thing with chefs and brewers and other creative people, Andre Soltner, a great chef and educator who died recently, a friend of mine had a great quote. She said, Andre Soltner said to all of us, because he was also a culinary instructor, he says, "You're not artists, you're craftspeople." And I think the same goes for brewing. And I didn't really come here to think we were going to talk about cask, but what is it called?
Backbeat Brewing Company, yeah.
In Beverly is just so good and right on that, and just seeing how you talked about it, I really feel like the mistake that's happened with a lot of products, craft beer, the old cask festivals, not Nerex, but others, people just went for quantity. It was like suddenly you had a bar and you'd have 10 casks all the time on the system. And you're like, well, one's not even good. Why would I want 10? Coming here to a place like this, I feel like this is the setting for a real cask beer. The same way this would be the setting if I was going to a natural wine bar. And I feel like that's almost the closest comparison to what people like. A good beer bar should be like a natural wine bar. And I know you're interested in natural wine the same way you're interested in good spirits. And that's about sense of place and hospitality. It's also the scale.
Yeah. The scale, like you were saying, like we couldn't do this. You couldn't do this at a 200-seat place. Like, how many seats is this? 50, 40?
45.
Split the difference. Yeah, like this is the perfect size. And it's like going back to my point earlier, that's like some people say, and a lot of people ask me this, is draft beer dying? Is craft beer, is the bubble popping? And, there's a lot to talk about in questions like that, but I think just going back to it, it's never going to die because it exists in places like this, niche places. You have a community. People come here because they are seeking this. And I think that will never die. It's the whole quantity. It's the gotta catch them all. Okay, now I'm bored. Or now my palate is fatigued because I had 3 New England IPAs and I can't tell the difference between them. Like, I think that is maybe what people are a little tired of. But this kind of culture, this kind of experience is always going to have a place because it's small, because it's not trying to please everybody. And there's always people who are going to be interested in quality and craftsmanship and consistency.
So on that note, I'm in town for the Bull Zoll. Actually, when we first met Max, we were looking for a location, and the place that Bull Zoll is in South Boston is also the location that Nerex is at, which is pretty cool. But tonight we're going to go out to dinner. And I know you've turned me on to a couple places like Bara and Union Square. You guys both know the scene. Where should someone like myself go tonight, tomorrow night in Boston, a small, intimate place for a good mix of food or drink? Jackie, you go first.
Oh, man. Okay. Every time someone asks me this question, I follow up with qualifiers like what neighborhood or what cuisine, just because it helps me. But I'll also say my default answer to this question for the last year and a half, 2 years, has been Comfort Kitchen in Dorchester. That's been my default answer for where should I eat right now in Boston? What's your favorite restaurant in Boston? I cannot say enough things about Comfort Kitchen. They're amazing. They have such a point of view. They're amazing people, hospitality, and the food is just out of this world delicious. And it tells a story, and it doesn't need to tell a story, but they happen to tell a story. And that is about ingredients and the way that they've traveled around the world and the way that they've traveled through places, through immigrants and immigrants cooking and stuff like that. So the food that they make is very authentic to Boston in the sense that we're a melting pot here. And yeah, I can't say enough about Comfort Kitchen. You probably can't get in there tonight, though, if you tried, because it's a small place like this. They probably have about 40, 45 seats. Another default answer I have is Tonino in Jamaica Plain, the neighborhood where I live. It's a very small menu. It's Italian, but just super delicious, handmade pastas. They do, he calls them like Philly-style pan pizzas. That's where the chef is from. Luke Fetbroth, who actually used to work on Moody Street. Luke Fetbroth used to work at Moody's Delicatessen, may it rest in peace. But Luke is the chef and owner at Tonino, and he is just an incredible chef. And their pastas and Philly-style pizzas and salads and specials are really, really worth traveling for and worth waiting for, because that's another place that the reservations are probably booked out. But those two caveats, those are my two default answers. What's your neighborhood? Oh, wait, I have another answer, actually, and you could probably get in here tonight. They're a little bigger. Brewer's Fork in Charlestown. If you've never been there, Jimmy, you would love Brewer's Fork. That's another beer bar in Boston. They opened, I want to say, I think they just had I think they're about to celebrate their 10th anniversary, 2015. I think they opened that same Snowmageddon, post-Snowmageddon spring. Brewer's Fork is wood-fired, so they specialize in pizza as well, but everything they make is from their wood-fired oven, so whatever you get is from that oven. So it's like meatballs or, whatever. They also do really good, raw seafood. They have, fun oyster preparations and stuff, and just a great beer bar. So, Jimmy, you should go to Brewer's Fork. I feel like that's the answer.
And Max, yours? First, Barra, Somerville, great suggestion. I've been going there now for about 3 years. What else, Max?
Brewer's Fork is really good. I like Mike Cooney and that family a lot. They're nice people. That pizza's delicious. It's funny because you said the same thing I was going to say, which is what neighborhood?
Yeah.
So
narrow it down a little.
Well, you're Dorchester or JP or what else, Charlestown. I'm like, dude.
Yeah, you would never. You can't travel that
far. It depends on the neighborhood. I will say, where are you staying, Jimmy? Well,
we'll probably be anywhere between Halston, Chinatown, where my partner Ark's staying, Somerville.
Okay. So, Taberna de Aro was one of my favorite Spanish restaurants ever. Deborah Hansen was the chef owner there for, 20, maybe 30 years, because I started going there in the late 90s. And it's such a great hang. It's delicious. It's great. And a couple of old friends of mine, Christy and her husband, Jesse, have sort of been passed the baton by Deborah, and they're running the place now, and it's so great.
Yeah.
And it's so unique, and it's I like it because it doesn't feel like some new shiny thing, like the Boston crappy concept restaurant where everything's PR and concept driven. It's really cool. I enjoy that place, and it's kind of old school. It's not the hippest thing to recommend, but I don't care. I'm not the hippest guy.
I'm going back old school, on your menu here at Deep Ellum. I had the grilled beef hot dog, a little kimchi and mustard. And I find more and more when I go out, it's also price, because it's usually affordable. Some places I can get 2 grilled hot dogs for $8.
Not in Boston. I don't know. What is it here? Probably, it's a craft hot dog, yeah. Two for $8, I don't know, but $6 for one, and good sides and a good bun.
2 for $8 sounds like happy hour pricing, which they don't have in this town. But there's a ton of great restaurants in Boston, in the Boston area. Sarma and Somerville is just dynamite. I feel like every time I eat there, it's better than the last time, and I've eaten there 30 times. I used to live around the corner from that place. Sarma's great. If you go down to the Ink Block and Parmigiana is a great bar to hang out. They have a great wine list, great cocktails. Their other shops are really cool. I don't drink a ton of beer when I'm out. I'm more of a wine drinker in my sort of real life. and I'm wild for Asian food. So like I can't even begin to tell you. You got to tell me what neighborhood you're in, and then I'll be like, okay, if you're in the mood for this one or that one or this one. And there's like new places that open all the time, and I have a hard time keeping up with it.
Yeah, it's been hard, the openings. I feel like I'm a little off my game too. I would say my favorite new restaurant from last year, and I did Best of the City for Time Out Boston last year, and I got to name the best new restaurant last year. So I picked Balea in that Ink Block area. I would highly recommend checking that out. It's Portuguese.
Where's the Ink Block? I actually don't even know all the neighborhoods.
Okay, so Ink Block is South End of Boston. South End, sort of it's like really close to South Boston. It's close-ish to the Broadway train stop, sort of over the bridge. They call it Ink Block, though, and this is one of my favorite fun facts. I'm raising my eyebrows right now. It's called the Ink Block because it used to be the headquarters of the Boston Herald. So they redeveloped the former newspaper office, and that's why they call it the Ink Block. So it's a huge development, like Max was saying, very PR-driven. I have this conversation with a lot of people who ask me, the question is, why does Boston food suck? Which is not true, but people have that perception. And I do think a lot of the restaurants that are in Boston proper are, it's hard to be creative when you're opening a restaurant in Boston proper. It's really hard because the spaces that they have to work with are often, if it's not a historic building that's 200 years old and needs a lot of work and you can't get a liquor license anyway, it's a new development and they want to fill this like 10,000 square foot empty space, and you got to put 150 seats in there, and you're paying $10,000 or more a month in rent. I don't even know, but it's really hard to be creative and to make unique places when that's what you're starting with, when you're starting with $1 million in debt. So Ink Block is one of those areas. It has been developed in the last 5 to 10 years. There are a lot of awesome places.
Now I'm getting agita. Now we're going to go back to what I like. We started out, you said you like good butter and onions. I know, because for Bolazol is one reason I'm here. Max, you're making some pozole. Tell us about the pozole and why that's important to you and why you wanted Bolazol here. Because, I mean, you loved it. Without you, we wouldn't be here.
Well, thank you. I'm happy you're here. I was talking to Arik, your partner in this Bolazole event, years ago, and he told me about the first one that you guys did down in Brooklyn, right? Was it Brooklyn? And he told me about it, and I was like, dude, that sounds amazing. I want to go. When are you going to do it again? And it was like, well, we're going to do it again next year, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, if you ever come to Boston, like, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Anyway, here we are.
Year 3, right? Year 4? Year 3?
Year 3 in Boston, year 6 or 7 in New York, yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, and it's, we're happy to be part of it again. We've got, I think it's the 4th year, actually, because I'm pretty sure I've done 3 different things. But this is the 4th thing. The pozole, so Lone Star Taco Bar, we make our own tortillas. So nixtamalized corn is a thing that I've had to explain to people a lot of times. Like, the corn tortillas is not made out of sweet corn. It's made out of a different thing. And I love pozole because it's like the root of like this ancient, talk about ancient stuff, like the root of this ancient food source in Mexico. And pozole is the dish, but it's also the thing that's in the dish that makes it called the dish, right? So the pozole, the nixtamalized hominy corn, is so important to the culture of Indo-America and that whole area, whatever, the ancient peoples there, that I find it fascinating. And like, it's different wherever you go. And like I was saying before about things I like, it's yummy. And I love the pork with the red, I like the green with the chicken, I like the switcheroo, and then there's sort of like variations on a theme. So because I'm not Mexican and I don't have an abuela's recipe or an abuelita's recipe to use, I've done some variations on themes, and we're doing I love chowders, and like because we're from New England, I made it for my dad years ago because my dad's vegetarian. I basically made pozole corn chowder, and there's no cream. It's not like New England chowder. My folks are in Rhode Island, so there's like more of a Rhode Island vibe. So it was sweet corn with pozole and a really, really rich vegetable broth with some guajillos and some anchos. And the idea was like elote corn inspired corn chowder pozole. So that's what we've made there. I started making it the other day, and I'm going to finish it the day after tomorrow. And it's what we've done for the last, this will be 4 years now. So it's a vegetarian pozole with corn as the focus. So there's fresh corn. I use the corn cobs in the broth. I cook them in the broth to fortify the corn flavor. I cook the pozole with corn, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of vegetables harmed in the preparation, and the end result is quite yummy, I think. And then the other one we do is inspired from Portland, Maine, where our restaurant Lenora is. And I make a pozole that's sort of a cross between a fish chowder, a lobster bisque, and a pozole. So it's lobster stock, fish stock, blended together, guajillo chilies, ancho chili, tomato paste. It's cooked down multiple days, different cooking projects, roasted lobster shells, and then it's finished the day of with the reserved lobster meat and fresh whitefish and fresh clams. And then there's a little bit of raw tomatillo in there, so it's like a little brighter, but it's pretty rich, and it's not, again, there's some potato in there, which harkens back to like old-timey chowder, where you use potato as a thickener. So there's no cream or a roux, but it has a little bit of potato cooked in, and the end result is like very comforting, and like it tastes like the proper thing. But the pozole themselves, I like to cook them in a pressure cooker. And I mix them at the end of the cooking process so that the pozole has just the right texture. So I don't like it super blown out, but I like it to be al dente.
You mean the hominy, the dry? It's like dried puff corn. How do you describe it?
So hominy is hominy corn. The maize has been dried and then cooked in lye and water. The lye is then rinsed off. Now you have a altered corn that's now more nutritious than it started its life at. It's chemically altered. You take that, dry that again, and now you have hominy. So that's what you use to make grits, tortillas, all manner of things, right? So if you take that whole corn and you grind it up, and now you have masa, you can make tortillas. But if you leave it whole, you can dry it again and then boil it and make soup and stews out of it. And that's where your pozole is the name of the hominy. It's also the name of the dishes. Cool. And it's very comforting. It's quite filling, and it's delicious. It's great foil for agave.
I would say I went last year for the first time to a bowl of pozole, and it's in February in Boston. It's February right now. It's very cold outside. And I could not think of a more perfect, like, walk-around tasting event than mezcal and pozole on a cold February day. That was, like, my main takeaway. I was like, this is a genius idea for an event in Boston in February. There's not, always a ton going on in Boston in February, and all I want to do is eat hot soup and drink spicy, not spicy, like, because they added spices to it, but spicy because it burns mezcal. Like, that's what I want to do. It was very warming, and it was really fun.
I'll tell you an insider secret. And you go anywhere new, it takes a few years to really get to know a place. And I think it was a couple years ago we did it in April, and Max said, listen, guys, after April 1st, all the restaurants have outdoor seating.
It's patio season. April 1st is patio season.
So, yeah, now we know.
And that's, like, very New England. I feel like we are like, no, it's spring now. Like, and in February, we're all still, like, hibernating a little bit. So I think that's really smart. That was a smart move.
Jackie, you lived in Vermont.
I did.
So, like, in Vermont, like, when it's not snowing out, you can wear shorts.
Yeah.
So in Boston in February, it's like, oh, you mean hot soup festival?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, this year it's on Super Bowl weekend, but by the time the show, this is all in the past when the show comes out. Guys, I just want to say thank you so much for Max inviting me to Deep Ellum again, and Jackie for joining me, because we've met a couple of times, but it's a pleasure to sit and talk to you guys. And thanks. I learned some new things about Cascale that I didn't know. And again, this is why I love the show. We came in here, did not know what we were going to talk about. I know you both had a lot to say, and we talked a lot about Cascale. So thank you. And any last things or questions for each other? How about that?
Well, it's nice to see you, Jackie. I haven't seen you in a while. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to do next.
Me too.
And I'm glad we could have a positive conversation. With Jimmy, when you talked to me about this, you're like, hey, let's talk about Boston and, like, the state of what? Like, what are we talking about? Like, I don't know, man. Like, it's kind of cold.
It's kind of bleak.
I'm like an asshole New Englander. I'm like, glass is half empty all the time, man.
Yeah.
Unless when I'm talking about booze and food, then I get really excited.
Yeah, so we got you excited. This was a good winter thing. We're inside. It's cozy. Got sweaters on.
It's fun to remember there are cool things happening in Boston. I try and remind people, but it's hard sometimes, in February mostly.
Well,
But yeah, thank you for having me on. It was fun to chat.
all right. So Jackie and Max, thanks for joining me on Heritage Radio Network. Big shout out to Gabriel Engineer who's going to clean this up. I'm Jimmy Carboni, and don't forget, heritageradionetwork.org. Support us, become a member. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Thanks so much.
I'm admitting here and now I have a crush on another podcaster. It's called The Sporkful, and it's hosted by Dan Pashman, who's also the inventor of the pasta shape cascatelli. Why do I love Dan so much? What is this crush about? He obsesses about food to learn more about people. Dan explores what's so special about a shallot. Should you eat fast food on vacation? Is halal pork impossible? This is a podcast that's not just for foodies. It's actually for eaters. Listen to The Sporkful wherever you get your podcasts. I know you'll be full and satisfied.